"You're telling me this whole thing," Jaden said, holding up the violin in his hand, "wasn't a joke." The weight of the instrument felt different now. Dear story lovers, welcome to the channel. I'm so glad you've joined us for this journey through stories that will captivate and inspire. If you're as passionate about stories as I am, don't forget to hit that like button, engage with us in the comments, and let me know where you're tuning in from. I'd love to hear all about it. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you never miss a new adventure. Thanks for being here, and let's dive into the stories that matter. At Clearwater High, the morning assembly seemed to drag on forever. Students sat in neat rows, listening to Principal Rachel Hardman's usual speech about school spirit and academic excellence. But Jaden Mills couldn't focus. He was always the quiet one, the one who sat at the back, away from the crowd. His classmates knew him as the quiet, mysterious kid who preferred the pages of the book to the noise of socializing. He didn't mind being invisible, keeping his head down, and staying out of trouble. But that day, his usual sense of calm was rattled by a sharp, calculating gaze from the front of the room. Principal Hardman was scanning the crowd, and when her cold, piercing eyes met his, Jaden felt a sudden weight on his chest. She had always seemed to watch for students like him, the ones who didn't fit in, the ones who didn't show enough school spirit. "Jaden," she called out, her voice sharp and commanding. Jaden froze, his heart thudding in his chest. He knew this moment would come sooner or later. The feeling of dread settled deep in his stomach. What trouble had he caused this time? He hadn't done anything wrong, had he? He didn't remember breaking any rules. But that didn't matter now. "Come down here," Principal Hardman said, her smile tight, as if she already knew something Jaden didn't. His mind raced, but his legs moved without thinking. He stood up and made his way to the front, feeling every set of eyes in the auditorium on him. He could hear the whispers, the low chuckles from the back row. Jaden had always been the quiet kid, the one no one noticed unless they were trying to make fun of him. And now it felt like everyone was waiting for him to trip up. "Why are you standing at the back?" Principal Hardman's voice cut through his thoughts. Her tone was condescending, like she already had him figure out. "Is it too good for you to sit in the front with your classmates?" Jaden's throat went dry. He shifted nervously under her gaze, his palms sweating. "My back hurts, Principal Hardman," he muttered, barely above a whisper. He had been sitting awkwardly in his seat all morning, trying to avoid the pressure on his spine. The truth was, his back did hurt. The weight of the day, the tension he carried, made every muscle ache. Hardman didn't care. Her smile curled in a way that made Jaden feel smaller than he already did. "Oh, a sore back, huh?" she said, almost mocking him. "Well, maybe standing isn't the issue." She turned her back to him, reached into a drawer, and pulled out an old weathered violin. The sound of the instrument being placed on the desk made Jaden's heart race. What was happening? This couldn't be real. "I don't know if you know this, Jaden," Hardman continued, her eyes glinting with something that made Jaden's stomach churn. "We have a spring concert next week, and you're going to perform a solo right here in front of everyone." The words hit him like a ton of bricks. The gasps from the audience around him felt like a million hands pushing him into the spotlight. Jaden stood there, frozen, unable to move or speak. He had never played the violin. Not once. He had never touched one in his life, not even for fun. "No, I don't play," Jaden stammered, shaking his head furiously. He could feel the heat rising in his face, the sting of humiliation already setting in. Hardman's eyes narrowed as she leaned forward, the smirk still on her lips. "Don't play games with me," she snapped. "Either you play or you can sit in detention for the next month. Take your pick." Jaden's hands shook uncontrollably as he reached for the violin. His fingers brushed the smooth wood, but everything inside him screamed for him to drop it, to run away, to hide. The violin felt like a foreign object in his hands. He could hear the laughter spreading through the auditorium, students whispering, some of them already making cruel jokes. Jaden Mills, the bookworm, who doesn't even know how to hold a violin. Someone whispered from the back. The words stung, but Jaden didn't dare look up. Instead, he stood there, gripping the violin like it was a lifeline, knowing that the moment he made a mistake, the laughter would drown him. There was no way out. He was trapped in this moment of absolute humiliation, and all he could do was stand there and wait for it to end. But he couldn't help but wonder, what if he didn't fail? What if, just for once, the impossible turned into something unexpected? The next few days felt like an endless cycle of humiliation and fear. Jaden couldn't escape the feeling of eyes on him, watching his every move, waiting for him to fail. Every time he picked up the violin, it felt wrong, like it didn't belong in his hands. His fingers fumbled with the strings, producing only awkward screeches that echoed in his ears like a cruel reminder of how out of place he felt. His back ached from hours of forced practice, but it wasn't just his body that hurt. The weight of Principal Hardman's cruel joke, the pressure to fail in front of the whole school, hung over him like a dark cloud. At school, the whispers never stopped. Every time Jaden walked through the halls, he could hear the mocking laughter. Some students would smirk and shake their heads when he passed. Others would make snide remarks behind his back, their words sharp and cutting. He couldn't escape it. Even when he sat in class, the weight of it followed him. It felt like the whole school was waiting for him to make a fool of himself, and that thought gnawed at him constantly. But in the middle of all the chaos, something unexpected happened. During lunch one day, Halima, his best friend since childhood, found him sitting alone at their usual table, his face buried in his hands. The usual energy he had was gone, replaced by the heavy weight of his failure before he'd even begun. "Hey, Jaden," Halima said brightly, her voice cutting through his dark thoughts. "You're not giving up, are you?" Jaden looked up at her, his eyes red from lack of sleep and the weight of everything on his shoulders. He felt utterly defeated. "I can't do it, Halima," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've never played before. I'm going to embarrass myself. The whole school's going to laugh." Halima sat down across from him, placing a book in front of him and a pair of headphones on the table. "You can't think like that. You've got to at least try." She looked at him with that familiar determined spark in her eyes, the one that had always inspired him to keep going even when things got tough. Jaden had known Halima for years. She was the one person who had always been there, even when the rest of the world seemed to turn its back on him. Halima shook her head. "No, listen. You can't give up. I won't let you. We'll figure this out together." Jaden felt a wave of gratitude toward her, but also a hint of disbelief. How could she think he could actually do this? He didn't have any musical talent. He couldn't even figure out how to hold the violin properly. But Halima was unwavering. "I'll help you," she continued, her voice gentle but firm. "Let's start small. We'll take it one step at a time. I'll show you the basics, how to hold the violin, how to place your fingers. We'll do it together, every day after school." Jaden hesitated, the weight of the situation still heavy on his chest. But something inside him shifted. Maybe, just maybe, he could give this a try, not for the school or for Principal Hardman, but for himself. And so, every day after school, Halima stayed with him. She taught him how to hold the violin, the basic finger placements, and how to draw the bow across the strings. It was slow going. Every lesson was filled with awkward sounds, the music coming out in halting, dissonant bursts. But with each passing day, Jaden could feel a small spark of hope. The doubt and fear didn't vanish completely, but now when he looked at the violin, it didn't seem like such a foreign object. It became something he could work with, something he could try to master. With Halima by his side, Jaden didn't feel as alone in his struggle. Her encouragement pushed him to keep practicing, even when the music sounded terrible. Slowly but surely, he started to feel a shift inside himself. Maybe he wasn't as helpless as he thought. Maybe, just maybe, he could pull this off. The day of the concert arrived, And Jaden was a bundle of nerves. His hands were clammy, his back throbbed with every movement, and the weight of the entire school's expectations bore down on him like an impossible mountain. He felt like a puppet, forced to perform for an audience that was only there to see him fail. He wasn't sure if he could make it through, but Halama's words echoed in his mind. You just have to try. That's all you can do. And for the first time, Jaden decided that trying might be enough. The auditorium was packed. Students filled every seat, and he could feel their eyes on him, their whispers buzzing through the air. As Principal Hardman called his name, a pit formed in Jaden's stomach. She stood at the back, a faint, smug smile on her face, clearly anticipating a disaster. Jaden walked to the stage, his legs trembling with each step. He could hear the soft snickers from the crowd as they waited for him to fail. The spotlight hit him, and for a moment, he couldn't see anything but blinding light. His heart raced as he took his place at the center of the stage. The violin felt heavy in his hands, like an alien object he didn't belong to. He positioned it under his chin, his fingers clammy against the strings. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The auditorium was dead quiet, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. And then, without thinking, Jaden played the first note. It was shaky, the sound uncertain, but it was a note. And then the next note came, and the next. Slowly, the music began to flow from him. It wasn't perfect, but there was something real, something raw in the way he played. His fingers moved awkwardly at first, but with each note, the music began to take on a life of its own. It was as though he wasn't just playing the violin. He was letting the music come through him, from a place deep inside he never knew existed. For the first time, Jaden could feel the music. It wasn't just about the notes anymore. It was about the way they made him feel. He could hear his father's voice in his head, urging him to keep going, to never give up on the music. The more he played, the more connected he felt to something larger than himself. The audience was no longer mocking him. The whispers stopped. Jaden looked up, his eyes scanning the room. The faces that had once been full of judgment were now wide with awe. Students who had once laughed were now sitting still, leaning forward, completely captivated by the raw emotion in his music. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't polished, but it was real. He was so caught up in the music that he barely noticed the doors to the auditorium opening. And then he saw her, Professor Chelix, the renowned professor of violin, stepping into the room. Her arrival was as smooth as the sound of strings tuning, a stark contrast to the chaos Jaden had felt only moments before. Professor Chelix was known for her ability to spot raw, untrained talent, and her presence in the auditorium sent a shock of both fear and excitement through Jaden's body. But instead of freezing, he let the music flow through him even harder. The final notes of the piece loomed in his mind. His bow was trembling, his hands shaking with exhaustion and nerves, but he pushed through. He played the last note, holding it longer than he should, just feeling the music fill every corner of the room. When he finished, he lowered the violin, heart racing, hoping that he hadn't just made a fool of himself. For a brief, terrifying moment, there was silence. The room held its breath. And then the applause came. It was thunderous. Jaden blinked in disbelief. Was it really happening? Was this real? His chest swelled as the sound of clapping and cheers filled his ears. The audience wasn't laughing. They weren't mocking him. They were applauding. He had done it. Jaden had played the violin, not perfectly, but with everything he had. And they had seen it. Professor Chelix approached him as the applause died down, her face full of admiration. "That was incredible," she said, her voice full of warmth. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Jaden, still shaken, could only manage a stunned smile. I've only been playing for a few weeks," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You have raw talent," she said, nodding thoughtfully. "With the right guidance, you could go far." Jaden could hardly believe his ears. In just a few weeks, he had transformed from the quiet kid at the back of the room to the center of attention. And it wasn't the joke that Principal Hardman had intended. It was his triumph. As he left the stage, still reeling from the applause, he saw Helena standing in the crowd, her eyes filled with pride. She waved at him, and Jaden smiled, feeling something inside him shift. He hadn't just played to prove others wrong. He had played for himself. The next day, after the concert, Professor Chalix approached Jaden backstage, her eyes full of admiration. She was dressed in elegant, soft colors, the kind of refined presence that made Jaden feel both small and powerful at the same time. "You have something rare, young man," she said, her voice warm yet firm. "I'd like to offer you a scholarship to train with me over the summer. You have the potential to become something incredible." Jaden's mind raced. A scholarship? To learn music? The same violin he had been forced to play in front of the entire school. It felt unreal, like a dream that was just out of his reach. His fingers still tingled from the performance, the memory of the final note hanging in the air. "You're telling me this whole thing," Jaden said, holding up the violin in his hand, "wasn't a joke." Professor Chalix shook her head, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Not at all. It was just the beginning of something much bigger." Jaden stood there, stunned. The weight of the violin in his hands was different now. It no longer felt like an obstacle, but a key to something he never imagined could be his. He had always been the quiet, unnoticed one, the kid who stayed on the sidelines, content to fade into the background. But now he was being offered something that felt almost impossible. A chance to turn his weakness into a strength, to make the very thing he feared into his future. As he left the backstage area, Jaden felt his heart pounding in his chest. The thought of the summer ahead, of hours spent with Professor Chalix, of learning something that could change his life forever, seemed too big to hold in his mind all at once. He stepped out into the crisp evening air, the weight of everything still pressing down on him, but now with the possibility of something incredible. When he returned home that night, his mother was waiting for him, her face glowing with pride. She had always believed in him, even when Jaden hadn't believed in himself. "I knew you had something special inside you, Jaden," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you, my adorable boy. You're going to learn from Texas' best violinist." Jaden smiled through his own tears, his heart swelling with feelings he couldn't quite name. He felt a deep, overwhelming sense of gratitude. For the first time in his life, he felt seen, not as the quiet, overlooked kid, but as someone with a gift, someone capable of achieving greatness. He hugged his mother tightly, realizing that he wasn't just making her proud. He was beginning to make himself proud, too. The story of the boy who was forced to play violin as a joke had turned into a story of triumph, showing that sometimes the challenges we face are the things that reveal our true strength. And as Jaden stared at the violin in his hands, he knew this was only the beginning of his journey. The weight of the instrument no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a promise that no matter how it started, no matter how awkward or uncomfortable or painful, it could lead to something greater than he had ever imagined. He wasn't just going to prove his classmates wrong. He was going to prove to himself that he could turn a forced mistake into something beautiful. Sometimes fate has a way of turning humiliation into opportunity, and Jaden was finally ready to embrace that truth. The boy who had once stood in the back of the room was now stepping into the spotlight, not because he had to, but because he could. And please don't forget to hit that like button, engage with us in the comments, and let me know where you're tuning in from. I'd love to hear all about it. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you never miss a new adventure.